Yes, please continue.
Thank you.
All right. I don't know where I'm looking. All right. Hello, everybody. I am very honored to introduce Dr. Rumiko Tsuchiya-Ito. She is a visiting scholar working with Dr. Lindsay Kobayashi, who unfortunately could not be here today because she is teaching. Rumiko is a senior researcher at the Institute for Health Economics and Policy in Tokyo, where she conducts health service research using medical and long-term claims data. She is a certified physiotherapist and has previously worked in a general hospital for 4 years. She received a Master's of Public Health in 2013 and a Doctorate of Health Sciences in 2017 from the University of Tokyo. Her research primarily focuses on how the built environment can influence aging of older adults with disability using public health and gerontological methodology. Today, she will be presenting her research, the physical environment, maximizing the functional ability of older people using long-term care. And we are very excited to have her and looking forward to her talk. So I'll hand it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Anjali. Hello. Okay. Okay, and my name is Rumiko. Thank you so much today. I'm so glad to have presentation here. And I came here January 5th, and I have been participating in Lindsay's laboratory. And I'm now very surprised to lots of snow and low temperature, but very feel comfortable staying in Ann Arbor. Today, I want to talk about physical environment maximizing the functional ability of older people using long-term care. And first, I would like to introduce myself. I'm a senior researcher at the Institute for Health Economics and Policy, which has some relation to the Ministry of Health in Japan. My research is shown in the slide. Among them, today I'd like to talk about research, first one and the second one mainly. This is today's outline. I will use 45 minutes to have a presentation, and after that, I will have questions if you have any. Then, at first, about aging in Japan. This slide is the international comparison of aging rate. The left figure is Asian country and the right one is Western country. The projection of Japan is illustrated in a blue line and the United States is a red line on right figure. And now in 2023, Japan is the leading country from the perspective of aging rate. However, other Asian countries also face super aging society in the near future. You can see the increase in the aging rate in Asian countries is steeper than that of Western countries. Japan already faces a phase of population decline. The number of older adults is estimated will not increase so much after 2025 compared to before. It is because the baby boomer generation became older than 75 years old. However, as I mentioned before, the fertility rate is steadily low and the younger generation will decrease gradually. Therefore, at the time of 1950, 12.1 people support one older adult, but it will turn to 1.3 in 2065. This is the last slide of this section, and this is a figure for the household structure change. Shown in purple is a family consists of grandparent, parent, and children. We call it a three-generation family. Such a family was considered the general structure of family in Japan, but the number of households living with children is decreasing gradually. There is a proportion of households with sole resident or only couple family is increasing. Under the current long-term care insurance, it is not enough to support those with severe disability without the help of family caregiver, even though they use long-term care service. The decrease in household with children indicate decreased family support for older adults. Therefore, the social background demands that older people can live as independently as possible by maximizing their ability. In the next section, I'd like to talk about why I focus on physical environment of older adults in this Japanese situation and what kind of research I have conducted until now. First, the definition of physical environment in this full study. Environment were defined in various ways. They can be divided into natural, social, and physical environments. Some researchers suggest the effect of indoor environment on older adult health and well-being. On the other hand, neighborhood environments such as road connection and public transportation are also important. In addition, I pay attention to surrounding environment between indoor and the neighborhood environment. This is because I believe that people with disability may have their daily lives defined by the environment right outside their entrance before they use public transportation. However, there is no research laboratory on environmental gerontology in Japan, so these kind of research are lacking. From here, let me show you some picture of Japanese physical environment. The photo above are detached dwelling. The leftmost one is the oldest, and the rightmost one is the newest. So the leftmost one is a typical Japanese housing, and the more you go right, the more Western style architecture is incorporated. And the photo below are all multiple dwellings. Tokyo is the center of both economics and politics in Japan. Therefore, even with the population decline in this country, the population of the Tokyo metropolitan area is increasing. People are difficult to buy houses in this area, and lots of houses are built as multiple dwellings like this. These are pictures of surrounding environment. Both outside of the entrance, and the steep gradient and steps could be barrier for some people. Next, I will show indoor environment. This is entrance. One feature of Japanese entrance is these lots of steps and differences. It is because of the humid climate. Floor should be constructed to 450 millimeters above the ground, which is stipulated in the Building Standards Act. Additionally, we put off shoes at the entrance, so this step is a sign of place where we should put off shoes. Sometimes these steps become physical barrier and prevent older people who had a stroke or a fracture from getting back home. There are many corridors in Japanese houses. Japanese housing is designed using metric or shakkanho, which is a traditional Chinese scale. The housing corridor designed by shakkanho will be 30.7 inches in width. The basic width for wheelchair user is more than 32 inches. Therefore, it is too narrow to use wheelchair. Next, this is the living and dining room. It is common in Japan to use dining table like a left one these days. However, it was common to use a low table as a dining table. The right photo shows kotatsu, which is a table for both the dining and living room with an electric heater. This slide is bedroom. Bed is common in Japan these days, but the futon mattress, such as the photo in the middle, is still popular. The rightmost photo is a closet for mattress, and putting a mattress in the closet every day is a manner of the Japanese. However, kind of difficulty exists when older adults stand up from the floor and put the mattress in the closet every day. On the other hand, some older adults with disability are crawling to get around and sometimes their risk of falls become lower. This is the dressing room. I'm not sure why Japanese housing is divided like this, but a hygiene area is divided into a dressing room, toilet, and bathroom. Due to such small divisions, the dressing room is very small, and people with poor balance cannot place a chair to walk. I'm sorry, this is the toilet. The right one is a Western style toilet, and it is common, but some houses, especially for older adults, tend to be especially older adults tend to be equipped with squatting type toilet. I thought these are Japanese original type of toilet, but I heard that these type of toilet are used in Asian country in Indonesia. As you can imagine, these type of toilet are barrier for older people with disability. This is the bathroom. As Japanese people like taking a bath every day, the construction of bathroom is also important. There is no regulation about the depth of a bathtub, and most of these have depth enough to soak above the top of their shoulder. This depth is also important for the Japanese. However, getting into a bathtub is a difficult activity for older adults. Therefore, there is a car with a bathtub like this. And the home visit service to take a bath existed in Japanese long-term care insurance. This is the last of this picture. And Japanese housing is based on Japanese custom, and some of these are difficult for older adults. Long-term care insurance delivers 5 types of housing adaptation for older adults with disability. One of them is an installation of handrail, shown by the photo on the upper right, and an eliminator of height differences, which is a photo on the bottom right one. The third one is a change of the lavatory basin, which means changing the toilet from a squatting type to a Western style toilet, shown on the left. This is a result of using long-term claim data in one municipality in Tokyo. It used the data from 1,759 housing adaptation and illustrated each proportion. Installation of handrail is the most used adaptation, and it occupies more than 90%. Elimination of height differences is the second highest percentage, but it is only 8.4 to 30.3%. In this study, we use long-term claim data in one city near Tokyo. We selected predisposing, enabling, and need factor based on Anderson behavioral model and selected 6 functional limitations related to housing accessibility from previous study. And these variables include cognitive function and visual limitation, and so on, showing figure in this slide. And the result is the likelihood of having housing adaptation implemented in relation to functional limitation. The main result was that housing adaptation were more likely to implement for those with disability in motor function, such as poor balance or lower limb disability. This result is consistent with the aim of the Ministry of Health which control long-term care insurance. However, housing adaptation are implemented significantly less among older people with cognitive decline and visual impairment. It can be imagined that the disadvantage of changing the physical environment for those with visual impairment or cognitive decline, but there is a possibility that suitable housing adaptation service may not be available for those with such impaired function. In this study, we examined the effect of care need level deterioration among older adults with clarity by using long-term claim data. The Kaplan-Meier plot was illustrated in the right upper figure, and older adults who implemented housing adaptation was 0.69 lower the incidence of care need deterioration compared to older adults who did not implement it. This concludes that housing adaptation service in Japanese long-term care insurance might prevent care need level deterioration among older adults with clarity. In this study, we use interline data, which was collected from older adults using home care, and examine the association between housing environment and self-rated health. This figure shows a result of only older adults with severe disability. High odds ratio mean worse self-rated health. From this figure, we can understand that lack of personal safety, poor sanitary condition, low or high indoor temperature, and the state of home disrepair are significantly associated with bad self-rated health. From these results, we can say that to support older adults, managing housing environment is important. However, limited access to home or room is not significant associated with self-rated health. I guess it is because this assesses the accessibility with only one question, and it is not enough to assess the complex accessibility situation. Therefore, I felt that we need to find an assessment tool for accessibility. In the next section, I will talk about the development study of Japanese housing assessment. As to the background of our development study, we conducted a scoping review of housing assessment tool in East and Southeast Asia to see what kind of assessment have already been developed. After we selected 22 articles, assessment used in these areas were classified into 3 types: scientifically validated for these countries, used after being translated into Asian country, and study-specific checklist which did not either translate or validated for this area. These assessments were aimed to assess injury hazard at home. There was a lack of housing accessibility assessment. Housing accessibility is redefined the extent to which features in the home environment facilitate or hinder the individual to approach, enter, or use it. And it was reported that it relates to activity of daily living and good quality of life. After conducted this scoping review, we initiate an assessment development study. This is a conceptual model of this assessment to person-environment fit model. The horizontal axis is the environmental place. It illustrates the strong to weak environmental place, and the vertical axis is competence, which means older adult physical capacity. Is this famous for you too? Yeah. Not familiar this concept? No? Okay, thank you. If the capacity is good and then person can do everything himself, physical capacity will be high, then this gray area is well adapted and the white area is not adapted. If the person has this extent of physical capacity and environmental stress, this person cannot adapt to the environment. But if we change this environment stress to here by housing arrangement, this person locate in a gray zone and get well adapted to this environment. Next, I show the assessment to housing and ABDA, which I translate and adapted to use in Japan. This figure is part of this assessment. This is developed in Sweden 20 years ago and used mainly in Europe. This assessment is divided into 3 parts. One of them is to assess functional limitation. For example, difficulty interpreting information, visual impairment, and blindness. And the second part is environment. This figure illustrates only 3 items about environment, but all items contain 160 items. The third part is a phase to find the magnitude of a barrier for each functional limitation. It means that we can check the interaction between functional limitation and environment. For example, when one older adult has poor balance and live on an irregular, uneven surface, the magnitude of his accessibility barrier is calculated as 1. Thus, this assessment was designed to assess the person-environment fit model. In order to use this assessment in Japan, we start a content validity study to consider existing environmental item list, whether the items are valid for a Japanese context or not, and identify if there are design features in Japanese housing that need to be added to the item list by holding expert panel discussion. The research design is the expert panel approach, and 13 experts participate in it. The participants have certification in occupational therapy, architecture, and care management. I ordered experts to check each item, write comment on the item before the expert panel discussion, and hold the expert panel for about 2 hours of discussion. The main question I asked the expert is whether an item of the environmental checklist is relevant in the context of Japan. In order to estimate it objectively, I ordered the expert to score how much relevant or valid are these items under Japanese situation. In question 1, it ranged from 1 to 4. In question 2, I asked them that, why do you think the result of question 1 to revise the item afterward? As to the scoring, I used 2 kinds of content validity indexes. One of them is the item level content validity index. This can be calculated by the number giving a rating of 3 or 4 on the 4-point relevant scale of each item. The second one is the scale content validity index. This is calculated by the number giving a rating of 3 or 4 on the 4-point relevant scale of all the items, which means calculating from averaging item-based content validity index. I'm sorry. Regarding the threshold of the recommendation for having excellent content validity, we use 0.78 or higher in ICVI and 0.90 or higher in SCVI. From here, I show the result of this research. The participant characteristics are like this. The average years of experience in profession are 40.5 years, and all of them have experienced housing adaptation. This is the result of content validity. The item constructed in 3 parts, outdoor and exterior surrounding and entrance and indoor environment. Since 2 rounds of expert panel were conducted, these results are presented in table. The first round converted 180 items. The percentage of ICVI above the standard in each section was low, ranging from 50% to 56.5%. In the second round, when after modification were made based on, second round, the number of items assessed was increased to 283. The percentage of ICVI above the standard rose to 89.2 to 93.5%, and the SCVI was 94.4 to 96.6%, thus meeting its standard. From this slide, I explain what kind of revision was needed to secure content validity. First, we need to devise the differences between the basic layout and the structure of the housing. As the entrance of Japanese building has some level differences, and these will be barrier for wheelchair user. On the other hand, a high difference in Agarikamachi, this differences is sometimes good to put off shoes, and it is good for older adults with poor balance. In any case, the entrance steps was newly added as an evaluation item because it is an environmental factor that can change the impact of environmental stress depending on the individual competence. In the process of revision, we need to add the newly developed and popular equipment. The Swedish housing enabler was developed 20 years ago, and in addition, the popular equipment is different between countries. For example, touch panel display and induction cooker are popular these days worldwide. On the other hand, the electric toilet seems not familiar in Sweden, but is very familiar in Japan. These new equipment are useful for older adults with disability. However, older adults with dementia sometimes cannot understand how to use it, and it could be new barrier for them. In summary, although the original version of the Swedish housing enabler was 3 sections and 180 items, it becomes 3 sections and 261 items in the revised version. The number of items increased a lot, and it is concerned with low practicality. However, because the basic layout of housing were different from Sweden and Japan, we need to add all possible items under the Japanese context. However, the content validity of this devised housing enabler is good. In the next step of this research project, we need to carefully select essential items. Now we have conducted the validity and reliability of Japanese housing enabler, and after finishing this process, we want to conduct a preliminary study using housing enabler. Moreover, we think that it is impossible to be used by occupational therapists without developing an educational program for assessing this too. And I guess this kind of assessment has an affinity to technology such as light detection and ranging. Therefore, we want to use this kind of technology to support scoring this assessment. This is the last of this section about the ongoing development study. And then I have done a very brief comparison of the underlying data for this presentation, so I will talk about it in this section. Shown at the top right figure is a paper from a collaborative study with Lund University in Sweden in 2017. It compared basic data related to housing environment and aging between Sweden and Japan. At this time, I have attempted to include data from the US in this framework. The construct of comparison are demography, physical housing stocks, indoor accident, and housing adaptation system. First, let's compare the population. Japan's population is about 10 times that of Sweden, and the United States population is about 3 times that of Japan's. The population size is quite different. The number of older people is outstandingly high in Japan at 28.6%, and the lowest in the United States at 16.8%. Conversely, the percentage of people under the age of 15 is high at 18.2% in the United States and low at 11.9% in Japan. This is a projection of the aging population. As I mentioned in the first slide, Japan has the highest aging rate of the 3 countries in future estimate. The United States and Sweden will be similar. This figure illustrates a projection of fertility rate. The projections are also very similar between Sweden and the United States. On the other hand, in Japan, it is a lot lower than the other country, and it was 1.29 in 2020. This number was affected by the pandemic of COVID-19, and the projection illustrates the number will increase gradually. The next slide shows a comparison of the housing structure built. In Sweden, a lot of houses were built in the 1960s and 1970s. So the Million Home Program policy. Since many of them are still habitable, there are many older houses than in Japan. On the other hand, in Japan, most houses are built of wood, which has a shorter average lifetime, and there are many newer houses. Interestingly, the US is right in the middle of the 2 countries. The next slide is dwelling size. The data I obtained was a square meter in Sweden and Japan. In the US, it's square footage. Therefore, I'm converted square footage to square meter to classify them this time. In Sweden, as a result of the majority of housing being built uniformly under the Million Homes program, more than half of the room are 51 to 100 square meters. In comparison, Japan has both smaller and larger housing. In the United States, it is very spacious compared to both countries. This is a result of fatal indoor accident. Since the data for the United States were categorized by different hierarchies of age, I listed the result for 61 to 74 years old at first. As a result, the first characteristic is a similarity in Sweden and the United States, and falls are by far the highest. In Japan, on the other hand, there are another characteristic that drowning and suffocation were higher than falls. For drowning, bathing is a problem, and for suffocation, it seems to be a problem that older people prefer a food food forms that easily clogs, such as rice cake. Also, poisoning seems to be high in the United States, and I don't know the reason for this. So if anyone know, I would be glad if you could tell me later, of course. This is a slide with the data between 75 to 84 years old was added. After added this data, the impression of this figure changed very much. And it shows that the rate of birth is very high among the older people in the US. This is the last slide of this section and the housing adaptation system. The Swedish and Japanese system can be described as two extremes. Sweden is based on tax funding system, and Japan is long-term care insurance of social security system. In Sweden, there is no grant limit and housing adaptation were paid based on need assessment. But in Japan, the grant limit is low at $1,717, and the expensive housing adaptation cannot be undertaken. As a result, the cost for housing adaptation in Sweden is twice as much as in Japan. I wanted to describe the US housing adaptation policy in this slide, but I could not summarize it because it is not uniform in the United States, and there seems to be many different systems based on the state and the people's position. So I would very much like to be able to summarize this while I'm here. Therefore, please help me if you have any specialty about housing adaptation system in the United States. Then this is the last section of my presentation. This is a future research plan here. Neighborhood accessibility is important for all adults because it relates to their health and social activity. However, it is unclear whether neighborhood accessibility affects the transition between locations, especially for older adults with dementia. In Japan, people face challenges regarding how to support older adults with disability, especially people with dementia, to leave their homes as long as possible. In 2007, a shocking lawsuit was decided, and this is a headline of an article about that ruling. This accident was when an older man with dementia was killed in a train accident getting into a truck during wandering, which led his family member to be sued by the Japan Railway Company for compensation. This was a really shocking accident and became a social issue. It is necessary to identify which accessibility measures that encompass this environment enable older adults to continue to live as they choose. Therefore, in this study, I will examine the effect of building environment on the transition of location for older adults with dementia using existing data platform and develop it for future research. Moreover, I will illustrate similarity and differences between the United States and Japan by making comparison and suggest a future strategy for helping older adults with dementia to remain in the community for as long as possible. This is the outline of this research. I plan to work on 3 studies as illustrated in this figure. In study 1, I would like to use NHAT and NANDA data and examine the effect of neighborhood accessibility and the transition of location for older adults with dementia in the United States. In study 2, following the result of study 1, develop the neighborhood accessibility indicator in Japan because we do not have rich data like Nanda in Japan. In study 3, I'm going to examine the effect from the perspective of Japan and compare the similarity and differences between the United States and Japan. I would like to talk about study 1 in more detail. The study design is a retrospective cohort study, and I'm going to use an hard and NAND data. The study sample is community dwelling older adults who have been diagnosed with dementia. The exposure variable, indoor surrounding and the neighborhood environment factor, I will select which indices are good to my research question. The outcome measure a transition in functional state, discharge from home care with a complete service plan, institutionalization, and death. In statistical analysis, Markov chain regression analysis and Cox regression analysis will be conducted. And the effect will be summarized using a hazard ratio and 95% confidence interval. In study 2, I'm considering the development process shown here. At first, I will explore which items are important as a neighborhood characteristic affect daily life for the adult with dementia. After that, I will look for data sources that have already been published for public use, such as National Land Information by the Ministry of Land Infrastructure, Transportation, and Tourism in Japan. In case of limited data availability, I will explore how to construct data using Google Street View. If data is created from image recognition, reliability must be verified. In that case, I will conduct a study for reliability. I plan to gather data on neighborhood environment using a field study in 2024. I will examine the reproducibility by the kappa coefficient of the data developed in study 2. In study 3, I will examine the same research question as study 1. So the research design, study sample, exposure and outcome measure, and the statistical analysis are the same. The data source I'm going to use are medical and long-term claims data in Japan, and data that I selected or made in study 2. This is the last of my presentation. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I have some questions in slide. So if you have any comment about this, I'm so glad. And I will be here until September. So please feel free to talk to me. Thank you.
Does anyone have questions in the room or on Zoom? If you're on Zoom, feel free to type your questions in the chat.
I have some clarifying questions. So first of all, very great talk and interesting topic. And so my clarifying questions are I think in section 2 of your slides. Could you please go back to the slide? I think that is a bar graph talking about the likelihood of house adjustments in relation to health. Yes, I think it's 21.
21.
Yes. So I'm just wondering, so about the definition of having housing adaptations. So do you mean any adaptations we mentioned in the previous slide on slide 20?
Yes. The if some of the 5 types of housing adaptation, if the person conduct one of the 5 housing adaptation, the person was classified as implemented housing adaptation.
So am I understanding correctly that the 5 types you mentioned, there's like one adaptations on the stairs or thing like it's about 90% of the house?
I'm sorry, my explanation is not enough because the sample of this study is people who are certified as long-term care need. So some of them did, some of them use housing adaptation and some of them did not. And the data about this is
among those,
all of the housing adaptation, 90% of them is installation of housing.
oh, I see. So like basically, can I explain the result as because like it's not 94% of people they use installation of 10 handrails. So does it mean that basically that is the exposure, that is the predictor that predicting the health outcomes on slide 21?
Yes, yes.
Oh, so basically that's the.
Most of them are installation of 100, I guess.
I see. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to make a comment. I think this was really good. And what I liked was your pictures of the environment in Japan, because sometimes you don't think about how the environment can change in different countries and different cultures. So how that affects older adults is really interesting. And I thought you did a really good job of presenting that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I want to echo that. You know, I think a little bit about the built environment, but I've never really thought about, you know, we tend to think of like street connectivity and all those, you know, larger things. And so to bring it into the home and then show those like different cultural differences in a way that like I don't think I've ever thought about before, is really, really fascinating, because I think from the perspective, I mean, this is a very, you know, my perspective of Japan is like there are a lot of healthier lifestyle adaptations that the US doesn't have. You know, we eat a lot more processed food, from my understanding. So it's interesting to see, you know, how, you know, aging and the issues that Japan is facing in that regard are needing to be increasingly addressed. So that's really, really interesting. I'm curious about, since you're lingering on this slide, you know, the sort of what appears to be not, you know, that big of a difference by household income. I'm wondering if you're going to be looking at sort of some of those social determinants, particularly as you look at the US, since we have, you know, a lot of different structural inequities here. So it'd be interesting to kind of bring that into your work as well, seeing, you know, if we have a lot more inequities in the US that maybe are or are not present in Japan.
Thank you so much. Yes, this result is very surprising for me too. And I asked the person who worked at the municipality, because they know well about public assistance, and they say to me that many of people using public assistance live in and did not have their own home. So if the person want to use housing adaptation in Japan, and they need to receive an acceptance from their owner, and but it is very difficult for them at first. And in addition, the Japanese housing adaptation did not cover the cost to recover the housing adaptation. So if the person move to other place, the person need to get back their housing adaptation, but they don't have money for it. So they cannot use this insurance. And I heard a story like that.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. That'll be another interesting sort of comparison for the US and Japan as well, the extent to which older adults are able to age in place here in the US versus not, because I know we have a pretty substantial long-term care system here. So who can afford to do that and who can't. And yeah, thank you. It's really fascinating work.
Thank you so much.
So like echoing on the conversation, so I think like you control for like household income, but I think like maybe it would be a good idea to control for the like home ownership as well, because that reflects your economic status, like socioeconomic status, and apparently as you mentioned that it will make the difference to like how possible that you could receive the housing, all this housing adaptation. So maybe that would be a good covariate to be considered, like adjusted for in your model.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, I think so. Yes, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I can go ahead and close the.
And yeah.